All right, gang. This is a surprise video for a lot of you, but I am here with my friend Carl from InRange. Hi, Carl. For
Hello.
those of you who don't know, InRange is a separate YouTube channel that is actually not Forgotten Weapons. He's not Ian.
No, it is not.
He does
It's a
not have a
splinter
goatee.
off of.
So before we even get started, Carl, let me tell you a story that happened to me when I was at the Cody Symposium, which is that I went around the Winchester Collector Show about 5 times for a day. The next day, I picked up Ian from the airport, and he and I went around a couple times independently, not together. And he came back later that evening and told me a story, which is that someone had started gushing about how much they loved his show, and they watched him on YouTube all the time, and blah, 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 and he's telling him, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then the gentleman said, yeah, I also like the way you had that girl do all the shooting.
Oh wow. Interesting.
So it was like 1 point on the board that Ian was confused for me. I was like, I'll take it. Just my one victory. I was like, that's how that feels, times 1,000. So, but on to our real topic. So, Carl and I are here to talk about monetization, which you've probably already read in the title, because he and I have vaguely similar opinions on the matter, and a lot of people have been talking about it. Now, the reason for this video is because the first primer episode has been fully demonetized by YouTube, and therefore is going to be of limited appeal to their algorithm. Previously, I have gone to the mat over every single primer, and believe me, we have copyright strikes and the demonetization and everything out the wazoo, but normally I go through probably about a 2-week process and everything comes back online to green. We miss out on a lot of revenue that way, but we stay quote-unquote monetized. And we're going to talk to you today about why we think that's important. But at this point, I can no longer apparently keep all of the primers monetized. All of our auxiliary videos, especially Anvil, those have been demonetized plenty often, and especially Anvil because he takes apart and reassembles firearms. That is a very big no-no, apparently. But since it's now affecting the core product, it's time to have at least some conversation about it, and I brought on what I consider to be an expert in self-demonetization, Carl. Carl, would you like to talk a little bit about InRange's experience with monetization, demonetization, just as a quick header?
Yeah, super quick version of this. So early 2006 was going on with this already. YouTube was going through its machinations of changing how it functioned, and at that point, InRange actually took, or I should say, and then with InRange, we took a very unusual approach in which I actively demonetized the channel. I don't try to monetize any of our content. I deleted the AdSense and went Patreon supported only, sort of as a stance against some of the things that YouTube's doing. So we have a very different model, and we have a different experience than some people as a result.
Now, from our perspective, we've always left C&Rsenal monetized. However, we did rely on Patreon right from the start. So our viewer numbers compared to the size and cost of our show means that we can't use ad revenue as a means of sustaining the show. It represents less than 4 or 5% of our total revenue for the show, and we consume almost 100% of our revenue every month just to get the show, to keep rolling. It's a very complicated thing. So for both of us, YouTube actual financial monetization has not been a major element, but we're going to find out in a little bit why that's so important. But let's back things up a little bit. We're going to pop some cards here to keep you guys on track for what we're talking about. So let's just bring in our first topic.
Yes, we are capitalists.
Now, Carl, I should apologize. I did not, in fact, ask you if you were a capitalist before I made this this theme header. But just so you know, this is a topic that comes up because people ask us, why don't you just do this as a hobby and then only release one video a month or something, versus on our site we do 2 videos a month. Carl, are you a capitalist?
Well, if the definition of capitalist in this regard is that I hope to make enough money to be able to sustain my life and produce the type of work and content that I wish to produce, then the answer to that is definitely a yes. I think you already described this in your regard, and I'm sure this is the case with C&Rsenal, and it's definitely the case with InRange. The quality and amount of content that we put out is not possible to be done as just a hobby. It's just not. So I don't know about you, but I actually I also do InfoSec work as a security engineer, and I try to balance monetary resources from that job as well as InRange to make it viable to do this. And I try to find what's the water level to make that happen. And InRange has to make enough money to make it viable to do the content we do. So yeah, in that regard, it is a capitalist endeavor.
Yeah, this is one of those instances in which there's not really an avenue for us to live our lives and produce this content. Especially Primer and C&Rsenal are very time intensive. Um, this gets back to kind of a thing, like Mark is our gunsmith. He has a show called Anvil. If Mark were to be in his shop by himself with no cameras, he might get 7 particular things done a day. When we're there, it takes him an entire day to do like 1.5 things, because he's doing the thing he's doing and then he's explaining it to the cameras. And for Mark's sake, he just has to think about what he's saying in a linear method, slow down what he's doing, and do it for your benefit. Then he has Bruno do editing and things like that. So even just to film that bit, Mark is slowed down quite a bit and loses out on potential revenue in order to do his show. The same gets much more magnified when you're someone like me who's having to do direct research just for the video, not because I'm doing some other task that I will get paid for anyway. So if it's not worth Mark's time necessarily without any financial compensation, then it's especially not worth ours, because we will starve, quite literally. The only way you would have a InRange or a C&Rsenal without funding is if someone independently wealthy just felt like putting it out there. And then you would be beholden to their whims, and there would be no sort of need to respect your schedule or your input. And so that makes C&Rsenal and InRange shows that essentially belong to the people who watch them. And it makes you guys the consumers and not the product, which is pretty good.
Yeah, it really is it's. I think we'll get into this more, but some of the things that have changed in the YouTube world and content distribution world have been, in some ways, if we can keep them sustainable, which we're going to get into more later, better and more pure. Because I frequently use the NPR model, but the reality is that things that are directly viewer supported provide the opportunity to provide the type of content that would never come otherwise. Altruistic measures are unrealistic and unlikely. And the only other resources that are going to have the kind of money to be able to put in the effort to do the kind of work that you're doing with the quality of your product and the in-depth nature of what C&Rsenal puts out, for example, and hopefully some of the InRange as well, particularly the historical vignettes, would only come from something like the mass media. And the mass media isn't going to make stuff like that, because that isn't what markets well to the average consumer base. So I think it's easy to say that, and maybe you'll disagree, but I think both in and C&Rsenal have, I don't know about niche, but we have a specific demographic and market that is not what I would consider broad in scope, but significant and large enough to sustain individualistic endeavors like our own.
Well, we kind of talked about this before the show, but there is a precedent for there being gun shows on cable television, which would pay for the production of a show. We know what those shows looked like, because there were decades in which they could have been done. And probably the best effort we saw was Tales of the Gun. And there's currently more Primer episodes than there are episodes of Tales of the Gun. And as much as I enjoyed that show, Primer goes into much more detail. Because if you went to a producer and said, hey, I want to make a gun show about gun history, they're going to say, I need it to be understandable by ages 8 to 62. I need it to be understandable by 2.5 million people. And if you get into niche topics, or if you get into niche developments, like being able to just sort of say, like, yeah, this one's double action, and not sit there and define double action for the next 10 minutes every time, well, you can't do that on cable. Cable wants every sentence to be understood, and they want it to be re-explained over and over again, so every episode stands alone. So Primer would be just too massive, and there'd be no time to get into the details you want to get into if it was a cable television program.
Yeah, it's interesting you use Tales of the Gun as your reference model, because I think that's a good, compared to what you're doing. Tales of the Gun would be the closest thing I can think of that ever appeared on mass media. But what you're doing is far, far more in depth than anything that Tales of the Gun did. Tales of the Gun was still relatively cursory, and that's the best that the mass media has been able to put out. When you look at the other sort of gun-related content that mass media is willing to put their money into, it's sometimes a lot worse than that. It's things like Sons of Guns, or things that are clickbait, or really not advantageous to our cause in general. They actually become detrimental in the long run. And the reason they put money behind stuff like that is because that sort of sensational junk is what gets views from the TV viewer base, but we don't have to play those games the same way on the internet.
The other thing is, with some of those topics, emotions are something that everybody can understand. Like, we might not understand the firearm, but we understand stakes, and we understand betrayal, and we understand anger. And so that's why those things are usually carried through. But it ruins the ability to just actually enjoy some topics. So, I've seen stuff that would be sort of like in range out there. You might have competitions like Top Shot, but then look at how much effort goes into setting up the stakes and setting up the drama versus actually executing whatever it is that you're doing. And you get some discussion of handling the firearm and things like that, but nowhere near the kind of detail, because they also really favor conversations about having your head in the competition, because that's what they're selling, is the competition.
Yeah, or can you believe what Bobby said on the show last night? Dun dun dun, and it's like, who cares? What are the scores? What are the times? Why did that gun work or didn't? That's the stuff that you don't get. Exactly your point. I agree 100%.
Right. So I guess what we're getting to is, yes, we need to be funded, because if we're not, this is what you're left with. You're left with things that can be funded from the top down, or things that are just personal projects that have no development. Now, just as a final point on this, what if I felt like doing C&Rsenal as a hobby and I had a regular day job? A lot of people have imagined that. I can't. I sat down when this topic came up through a Facebook chat that we had, or a Facebook post that I had, and I sat down with someone who's sort of new to the C&Rsenal side of things, and he was like, how much does it really cost you? And we tried doing the numbers on a very basic episode for Primer. And once we got to about $2,300 as a baseline cost per episode, we started losing track of things into weird overhead channels where it's like, how do you put a value on this and how do you put a value on that? And then what am I actually supposed to get paid per hour for my work? Because that's not factored in yet. And it just goes all to heck from there. So reasonably, if I wanted to do one episode of Primer a year, I would still have to fork out $2,000 to make that episode. And then how would I do that? And you say fork out $2,000, but it's $2,000 because my animator is available at this pay rate when I'm willing to pay him every month. If I'm not willing to pay someone every month, how much does it cost you to commission a singular piece versus a rhythm where somebody relies on it? And so there's a lot of costs that would get doubled, essentially, if I did the one episode versus back to back to back, and it sort of provided somebody a reasonable income, blah, 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 blah. So, multiple thousands of dollars, even as a hobby, to produce a single episode once a year, I still wouldn't do it, because I would spend that money on a vacation for my family or something, you know what I mean?
And even if you had those resources, could you go to the place you needed to go or spend the time you need to spend to do it?
I'd have no recognition. So who would send me anything? Because there'd be 3 videos of me out there on the internet.
It might be the 3 best videos ever made on the internet, but that doesn't matter if no one sees them, right? So the reality is, I think that, and this isn't like a woe is me first world problem thing, it's just reality. Unless you've done this type of content creation, it's really hard to explain how much time and effort and how much time you spend just over the editor, never mind actually garnering the content. And that's something that's really hard to measure into what's the metric of time versus value versus profit, if there is such a thing to even call it that, and then what you want to put out to the world. But what we are saying is that without some sort of funding, whether it's advertising revenue, which is we're getting into more, or direct viewers, without funding, this stuff. So that's just what it is.
Yeah, I do. You touched on something there. I want to be very clear. I don't deserve this money. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that you should give it to me because I deserve it. I'm saying that if you like what I am producing, you should support it because that's how it exists. And then, by the way, if nobody likes it and nobody wants to support it, then I will have to go get some other job. I will do my best at that job. I will have income. Like, I'm not saying I'm going to go out and starve if you guys don't support C&Rsenal, and this is not a woe is me. This is just a, if you would like it to exist, this is how it exists. This is just sort of objective how-to money talk. It's not supposed to be a, uh-oh, Spaghetti-O, please help me. I can't afford to pay for my, truck payment or something like that.
I always find that interesting when I see people on the internet say that sort of stuff, or even hear the word e-beggar. It's not about that at all. It really is like, if the product is something that you like and it's something you enjoy, like it's no different than going to the store and picking up a magazine that you like. Like let's say you happen to like Recoil magazine and you buy a copy of Recoil because you want to go home and read it. You bought a thing to enjoy that you don't need to have in your life, and they don't need to make Recoil, but there's a benefit there in that you enjoy the product and they hopefully enjoy making it and they're able to sustain their lives when you buy it. This is one thing we'll get into more in the video later, but like that's one thing that I think that the direct viewer support model is really cool about, because that's what we're doing, right? We're producing a product that hopefully people enjoy, that we enjoy to make. That's a good thing because then that comes through in the video, but also producing a product that people want to see and sustain and continue to watch tomorrow. And that's what this is about. If people don't support it, then it goes away, and that's fine. That actually is the free market, right? But there's other machinations going on with YouTube and other places that are challenging our ability to even effectively run that model, and I think we're going to get into that more in a little bit here.
Yeah, correct. And by the way, we've talked about the finances, and now the finances are practically over because this next topic sort of breaks all of that. Let's take a look.
Why do you need YouTube monetization so badly?
Well, I don't. InRange doesn't, at least. InRange in 2017 proactively demonetized itself. I deleted the AdSense account and went to a Patreon-supported model because back then you can watch old videos on InRange, in fact. And I know that I've taken a somewhat different approach to this, maybe a more severe one. But this comes from my old hacker background and working in InfoSec. And I kind of saw, in my opinion at least, what was going on with YouTube. And I personally believe that there's more than one thing going on here. I think that we're seeing the mass media usurp and take over the new, and that they're mad that they don't have the eyeballs they had with TV on the internet. And I think that's part of what we see with YouTube. So I don't need YouTube's monetization. I need support from viewers, and I need viewers to see the content. And that's something that we're going to have to get into because YouTube is no longer making it the fair playing field that it used to be.
Yeah, so let's turn back to money for 1 second. Specific to money, you and I both primarily rely on Patreon. So if you want to be a supporter of either of our shows, check out our Patreons, number one. There's our little e-bag. But I'd say every month on Patreon, we see a fall off of a certain percentage. It kind of varies by season, but not everybody remains a patron every month. I think the feeling with people that don't run these sort of things is that you would keep 98% of your patrons every month, but really a few more than that tend to fall off. And so you have to add new ones every month. That's sort of, it's basically like you either have growth, even small growth, or you have entropy, and the inevitable heat death of C&Rsenal or InRange will occur. And so we are constantly in search of growth. Not just because of the financial aspects, but because that's where the support base comes from. People leave, people die, people get hit by buses, you know what I mean? It's not good enough to count on the number of people that you have. Yeah.
They could decide they're not into guns anymore. Maybe they're into like something else.
Or they had a baby. That'll put you offline for 3 years. But the point being is we got to have new viewers. That's like the whole goal. And then the other thing is when I started C&Rsenal, and probably when you started InRange, the goal was not to be a millionaire. The goal was to put out content that people enjoy and have people enjoy that content. So of course we want to reach new people just for the sake of them enjoying what we're doing. What you said just a moment ago alluded to is that the biggest part of the monetization on YouTube is that it costs YouTube money to house our videos, and a lot of people forget that. There's a server somewhere. It is in an air-conditioned environment, and space on it is being taken up by the stuff that we upload. And so whenever it shares it, that also consumes bandwidth, which has its own costs. And they don't really want to serve a video repeatedly that's not going to make them a single dime. There's some added benefits to being sort of the premier platform, and that is why they've been able to run in the red, is because that puts everybody in one place, which is what they really want. But on the whole, I would like to not see even a 5% reduction from the standard sharing level. I would like my videos to be shared evenly based off user algorithms alone. So in other words, a user might like my video, boom, they're shown my video, versus a user might like my video, but it is not monetized, so therefore we won't make any money, so we're going to put it down at the bottom of the list or maybe not on the list at all. That's the fear of demonetization.
Yeah, it's not even the demonetization is part of it. Now, InRange being proactively demonetized, of course, we've had an even bigger uphill climb because one of the things I said in the videos back in 2017, and I guess it's a little bit snarky, but it's the truth, is that, okay, fine, if this is the game you want to play, then when we take our AdSense account off and people watch the videos on your network, I'm pretty much using your network for my benefit and you don't have one anymore. And that's the game they're playing, right? So, but it's never about monetization for InRange, at least, not from InRange, not from ad monetization, I should say. But what you're describing is correct in that I've seen an insidious thing going on for years now, and it's been getting worse. The demonetization thing that you're fighting with, which is videos that should be monetizable by their own policies or not for inexplicable reasons, is one thing. But then things like subscribers not seeing videos showing up in their feed, or the most important part of YouTube, that is, I think, one of the coolest things that it can do with its gross aggregation of such wide swaths of diverse content, is that if you like watching this, you might like watching that. And that is what allows independent content creators to grow on YouTube, is that device alone. And never mind their monetization, but that one thing, which they don't have an obligation to provide, but in providing it, they've created an entire new world of data and video content creation and a new economy, really. And by changing that and then prioritizing some things that are to their liking or whatever, or the mass media's preference, and now pushing down things that aren't necessarily to someone's liking, whatever that origin of that someone is, suddenly you see things like the promotion of, you watch this, we would have in the past shown you this InRange video that we think you would have liked, but we don't show you that InRange video anymore. And that's how channel growth occurs. And without that channel growth, as you said, Patreon decline occurs with it over time.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And then even without Patreon decline, your ability to get the message out to more people. So if I were to have a t-shirt campaign, I'm going to reach fewer people because I'm not monetized, so I'm not getting these views, they're not coming through. And that's really the fear. It's just a fear of lack of growth. Now, currently, is C&Rsenal hemorrhaging to the point that it's going to bleed out in 6 months? Absolutely not. But we're watching it because we would like C&Rsenal to last for another decade at the least. And being short-sighted is no way to run a business. So that is where the concern comes from. And so that's why you're watching a very calm video right now with two of us discussing this instead of some alarm bell freak out about how we need to accomplish this. And if you could just send 30, snapbacks in the mail, write them down and just email them to me. And then somehow we'll provide that. No, we don't have a campaign for this. It's just so you are aware, these are where our concerns are at. But
can I mention one thing to that?
Oh,
I think
yeah,
that's interesting of this is that I don't know how much you pay attention to the analytics that you can acquire, not just from YouTube, but analytics that are outside of YouTube. That I've been gathering this information for a while, and I don't have it in a place that I can present it here on this discussion today. But if you start looking at certain types of content, and by the way, it is not just firearms, guys. Everyone thinks this is against guns. It's not. The mass media has a lot of things that they don't want to compete with, and this is just one of the topics. But if you start looking at the data analytics, I have noticed a very considerably obvious trend of subscriptions slowing down on all sorts of channels that I would consider of similar nature. So you'll see this growth curve where it's like, oh, the channel's getting bigger and bigger. And as the channel gets bigger, growth should be semi-exponential because as more people see it, more people recommend it. As more people recommend it, more people watch it. More people watch it, more subscriptions occur, and this thing starts arcing upwards. And there should be like this point where you get enough gravity that people just kind of start feeding in and you get more subs. But I've been watching certain types of content, and not just guns, the subscriber growth rate has suddenly gone bloop. This is not losing subscribers, but the rate of subscriptions that are joining the channel are decelerating at an alarming.
No, I remember.
And that's something to do with their algorithm.
I remember when Forgotten Weapons was at a 200,000 subscriber level like we are now. And it just suddenly jumped. It just moved so fast over a couple months because it suddenly caught fire. And yet now it feels like everything's slowed to a crawl. And a lot of that's based on whether or not you have content that's going to be very favorable to the advertiser algorithm.
Exactly. So I don't know if you've seen this directly with C&Rsenal. I'd like to hear your input on this because I'm not looking at your analytics specifically. But the irony is that as the channel has gotten bigger, the average subscription rate per month has decelerated, which is the opposite of how that should.
Yeah, I mean, there's an upper limit to a lot of channels, but we don't seem like we're anywhere near it. And here's what's happening, though. So the reason why, by the way, even if we were monetized, let's say that we're pigeonholed, we're being stuck in with just other gun content, and we won't be shown to anybody unless they like guns, and then the only ads they will run are gun ads. YouTube's still smart enough to have a bid system on their advertising, so the more viewed something is, the more, well, it's kind of like this weird process where it's like, is the video popular to begin with? Well, that gives it some value, but is it popular across multiple age ranges, multiple genders, multiple whatever? Like, is it a very broadly appealable video? Does it have zero adult content in it? If it's one of these G-rated things that we can show to everybody and it doesn't have anything that we believe to be politically or culturally sensitive in it, well, then we give it this super gold star standard, and then the ads that go on to it pay more to be ads on that video. We highlight the video more. That makes the video worth more. The ads pay more to be on the video. And so YouTube ultimately makes a lot of money off of these few videos that are universally acceptable to people and can be sort of held up on a pedestal and seen widely. Even if YouTube decided to promote Primer, they would put it up on, let's say they put it up on a pedestal on the front page. The viral aspect of a Primer episode is going to be very low because it's very heavy and long. And so by that measure, Primer is always going to be behind better advertisable content, and therefore it's going to be lower recommended regardless of monetization or not. And that's another fear about not necessarily being on an even playing field. So really the core complaint is, can we please have people who are in this interest at least get the video? We're not worried about the dollars, but we know you are. And that's where we're at loggerheads, because our interest is to be shared and their interest is to share what makes money.
You know, you touched on another topic there, which is, I think, very relevant in that when I said it's not just firearms content, there's a lot of stuff that's really interestingly being deprioritized, if not demonetized, or both, or worse. A lot harder, just apolitical.
Hold on.
Historical content,
Carl.
like a history video.
We had just a slight lag there. Give me that one more time. There's a lot of other content that's being demonetized.
Yeah, so there's a lot of other content besides firearms, as I mentioned earlier, which you kind of touched on this a little bit, that's getting not just demonetized, but also deprioritized. And that's another insidious part of this. And some of the stuff that I watch that I really enjoy, or channels that I'm aware of, are being hit with this, are things that are necessarily apolitical historical content that is considered maybe controversial. Like, so, for example, of a content creator called Skeptoid, and he does a rational thinking, and he does some videos about the same kind of content. And he had a video that was debunking Holocaust revisionists. He was debunking the people that deny the Holocaust. His video was against them. His video not only got demonetized, deprioritized, they pulled it off the network and gave him a strike on his channel. So essentially, if you're mass media and you're putting advertising dollars into YouTube, you don't want your money near anything that even could be controversial. So that means that if we go with an only advertiser supported and we allow YouTube to do what it's doing with what it is now as viewers, that means we're going to get fed only.
Yeah, there's also, that touches on some weird stuff where there's certain topics that even if you handle them correctly, so guns, firearms, right? They say they're potentially dangerous, they're potentially harmful, whatever. Even if you sit there and teach a gun safety course, sometimes YouTube's not going to like it, because if there's a topic that is quote-unquote bad, and only 100 people know about it because it's a bad thing, and then someone who has 2.5 million followers comes out and says, hey, 100 people think this bad thing, it's wrong. Okay, yeah, a lot of people are going to be mad at it, but you probably doubled their base. Like, just in telling 2.5 million people this is wrong, at least another 100 of them went, I don't know, I might disagree with you, and now you've got these 100 bad people are now 200 bad people. And that is this weird fear that is going around a lot of tech circles, which is we don't want to give an audience even to the denial of quote-unquote bad things because we might create more bad things. I think it's a little insane, and it flies in the face of free speech, but that is a concern that is out there.
Well, the thing about this that concerns me is that if you believe, and I do, I believe that the internet is the most incredible humanity, freedom of information, speech, and just liberating our mind. I realize YouTube is just one version of that, and it's, however, it is the big one. It is really, if there's content distribution on the internet, it's on YouTube. Any place else becomes a cul-de-sac, unfortunately. And so any topic that has any level of controversy to it is something that isn't going to be necessarily YouTube friendly. So if YouTube was the public sphere of discourse back in, let's say, 1960s, in my opinion, they would have been deprioritizing, demonetizing, and not promoting Martin Luther King Jr. So, because he would have been controversial. And that's a dangerous place for us to be.
Yeah, that's a completely fair assessment, because what's happening is we're moving not towards... Yeah, there's arguments that it's towards one political side or the other. Disregarding that, the best case scenario is that we're moving towards vanilla only. And it's just... that alone should be worrisome on a platform. Now, whether or not we have a solution for that, that's a separate issue. But let's talk about the first thing that we could probably be doing first.
Why not just leave YouTube?
Well, I don't know, Carl, you know anything about switching platforms?
I think I know a lot about switching platforms, or attempting to. So InRange actually started from the very beginning. I had concerns about the whole YouTube thing. And Ian and I started InRange. The very first year of InRange was on Full 30 only. Full 30 at that point was a startup, and it was supposed to be the new future of all firearms content distribution. And we spent a year on there and garnered a small number of viewers. And Ian was using his, already at that point, reasonably large, not large like now, Forgotten Weapons channel to promote InRange on Full 30, saying, hey, guys, we're not going to do this on YouTube because of what's going on with YouTube. This is so long ago. This is like years and years ago, well before all these controversies. And we learned right then and there that most of the time when he said something like, hey, we have this other content you probably want to watch it over there, most people wouldn't, or they met it with hostility. And we couldn't grow the channel there, so we landed up essentially giving in and then distributing InRange on YouTube and Full 30. The minute we started putting content on YouTube, and this is before YouTube started doing a lot of what it's doing now, the growth started happening. We immediately started getting subscribers, and we started getting more attention, started getting a lot higher view counts and being able to do better content. And then as YouTube continued to get weirder and weirder and weirder, InRange, I'd like to think that was sort of, that I was one of the tips of the spear, for lack of a better term, in terms of bringing attention to the problem, and tried to decentralize and believe very strongly in decentralization of video distribution. So InRange is on Full 30. It's on YouTube. It's on Facebook. It was on something called VidMe, which I liked at the time. It's on Bitchshoot, which I think we should get into that one more later. It's also somewhat on Pornhub, as I use that as a...
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. That got a lot of attention. But here's the reality. On all of those different distribution networks, we provide the ability for people to watch this on any one of those. The reality is 95% plus of the viewers are on YouTube. And if you tell people to go watch it somewhere else, they generally won't. And there's reasons for that. YouTube is a wonderful technological platform that aggregates all sorts of diverse content in one place. It's fantastic. I love YouTube. I really do. I think YouTube has done amazing things. I just don't like what they're doing to content creators. But I get why people stay there. But I can tell you that just change platforms won't work. And if you take yourself off YouTube, or worse, YouTube takes you off them, I think your time as a content creator's days are numbered quickly.
Yeah, so, by the way, before I get any further down into it, my stab about the Pornhub thing, Carl had uploaded to Pornhub and then thought, I don't know if this is funny or not, and then sat on it. And then, unrelatedly, I uploaded to Pornhub and sent it to Carl and said, hey, you think this is funny? And he went, yeah, I had that same idea, and I never went through with it. And so a bunch of my Discord goons and I were laughing about it. So we took a screenshot and posted that to social media. It went very well. So Carl goes, screw it. So he launched his video that had been sitting on there forever. So I go to bed after this Pornhub joke with like a single screenshot, and I wake up to like everybody talking about Carl. Did you hear about Carl? And I was just like, oh, that's cool. It's nice to feel included. So
Yeah. Well, okay, fair. There wasn't meant to be exclusionary, but it did get way more than was expected
well,
because
I think it touched on
I
something
think,
people were feeling,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
that it made the point that suddenly firearms content, stuff that used to be on cable television. I mean, if you think that anything in range or C&Rsenal have done that it would not be available on cable television to a general audience, it's not profane, it's not violent, it's not whatever. And yet now the joke is it's only fit to put on the pornography sites because it's that forbidden. It's interesting. It's interesting to think that YouTube as a platform has not. At first, it rescued us from cable, and now it's become worse than cable in some ways. Not entirely because the content's still there, but it just doesn't support the content, which is very odd. Um,
I'm very concerned, to be honest, because I'm an old school computer guy, hacker dude, that kind of thing. I'm doing the old BBS stuff with a 110 baud acoustic coupling jack modem when I was a tiny kid. So I've
aren't
been
you
on that
fancy?
thing for a long. Yeah, no, I know, but I mean, I really philosophically, legitimately, whether people like me or not or agree with me or not, I really believe in the promise of what the internet can and should and the internet has been in many ways. And watching what's going on with this very deeply hurts me and concerns me. I feel like we're losing something very, not just Americans, I'm talking globally. And if we allow the corporations to do this as consumers, if we just go along with this, we're going to lose something very valuable to us. And that Pornhub thing did speak to, because it's very interesting to note that when you look at a lot of the technological advantages and things that have come to the internet, a lot of it's been based on human vice, pornography being one, as well as pornography has frequently been the last bastion of free speech left when things go wrong. If you look at some of the quotes from Larry Flynt, he took a bullet for some. So Pornhub was good to us. They allow us to have our channel. In fact, they even made, I don't know if they made it because of InRange, but at one point I was complaining that they didn't have a scheduling system, because when you upload video, you want to schedule it across all these different platforms. And then all of a sudden, if it's causation or correlation, I don't know, they added a schedule. But it was really cool. And I kind of wish that of all the companies out there that have the technological prowess and finances, I wish Pornhub would move on being a free speech video distribution platform. Maybe not Pornhub, but like Video Hub or something, because I think they're one of the few that could actually fight the power of the Google.
Yeah, but the question is whether or not they can actually make the income on non-pornography, because pornography it's compulsive enough that you can sell ad space on it. But then there's a lot of other vices that are not necessarily so compulsive that you automatically get to sell ad space on them, and I think that's sort of, it's odd, but you do make a very interesting case for the fact that the funding that pornography brings has often enabled free speech. It's interesting to think about. That's a whole other topic that I would love to cover, but
It is.
it's not my show, thankfully. The Oh my god. So the question is back down to why don't we switch platforms? Well, I actually tried VidMe back in the day. It crashed out, like it was subsumed. Bitchshoot is up. It works intermittently for us. I don't know why, but the large size of primer videos tend to kick the crap out of everything we come across. So we do have a Bitchshoot backup. I'm trying to keep it up to date. It's proving to be a challenge. By the way, anything decentralized means that you have to spend the time chasing it around and filling out the forms in the various ways. Bitchshoot has what I think is an Achilles heel, which is that you must upload the video into a sort of buffer space and then hit finish, and YouTube just takes the video straight in. So you can just dump a video on YouTube and walk away. If you dump a video on Bitchshoot and walk away, if you come back too late, you'll get a 404, which is kind of tricky because it means you have a window in which you must come back to the video. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you're in a hurry, that's a pain in the butt. Full 30 for me did not work. I tried, and they started cutting off our videos. They had lots of server problems. I tried for weeks to get them resolved internally. They were intermittent with communication, and then eventually I gave up, just stopped talking to them. A year later, somebody reached out to me, tried again for a few days. They gave up, stopped talking to me. A year later, new guy comes in, goes, "Hey, why aren't you uploading anymore?" Starts the whole process again, and then rinse and repeat. I think I made $12 off the platform the entire time I was there, and honestly couldn't get anything uploaded and couldn't get my emails answered, so I gave up. To me, and I'm sorry I'm making this public, but Full30 does not seem to prioritize their own mission. I think they need a discovery system. I think they need a bunch of other things that they are just not going to implement. And this is the problem with other platforms. So Bitchshoot has videos. Bitchshoot does not have a good discovery system. And it's not so much YouTube that is making it for us. YouTube could be the only video service on the internet. It could be the only one. If it did not have the organic discovery system, we would not be modeling on it. And that's the problem with a lot of these alt platforms, is they do not have reasonable organic discovery built in.
Sorry, I was gonna say I agree. I don't care. I don't really care what platform people. I don't care. I'm completely agnostic to the platform people watch the content on. I would be totally down with uploading MP4 files to an Amazon S3 server and let people download them directly. I don't care. I just want to get an audience and have people see the content that we like to create and have an audience big enough to support the project. That's all I care about. I don't care if it's on YouTube or Pornhub or Facebook or anything, as long as we're not censored and we're allowed to do what we want to do and that we can grow the channel. That's all I want.
Yeah, so that's where we're at. Like, we're actually not married to YouTube, and we're not really opposed to working with other platforms. The problem is a lot of the ones that you guys want us to go to don't offer the tools that we need to succeed there right from the get-go. That's never going to work. Like, and it's hard. You don't want to be that person that just sort of goes, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. But it's kind of true. Like, you can only put so many things on one person's plate at a time. And if you distract them with a bunch of very noble sounding ideas that are not going to fundamentally work, you're spinning your wheels and you're exhausting that person's attention for the next time maybe something really good actually does show up. That's sort of the fear.
This is why with InRange at one point when I was literally filming. So right now I do to BitChute, YouTube, and Facebook. Every piece of content that goes out on InRange goes out on all three. And YouTube. So we have 4 distribution points that when putting that content on. Every video that goes live on InRange goes onto those 4 locations every time. I was doing Pornhub, was doing VidMe, was doing Minds at one point, and at one point I had like 7 distribution points. And I got to tell you, every distribution point you add is a lot of other intellectual overhead. You got to remember to publish it there. You got to remember to upload it, which by the way is a bandwidth constraint. These video files are huge, and now you've got to upload your 4 gig video file, or however big yours are. They're probably terabytes. You got to upload it. You got to upload it 7 times. Well, whatever this, let's say it's the 1 gig file, that's fine. But now it's 7 gigs, right? Then you've got to make sure you schedule all the time. Socks, some of them might not. Some of them might have a scheduler. Some of them might not. One of them might not render right. One of them will. That stuff, that amount of overhead to keep adding distribution points becomes overwhelming to the point where all you're doing is uploading content.
Yeah, I mean, even if you template it, you almost have to keep a worksheet to yourself to remind you what to do. But let's talk about something else about this too. Specific to Full30, you have these sites like Full30 and Gunstreamer that are content collected, so they are guns, and that's all they are. Why isn't that going to be our salvation? Well, because a lot of my audience isn't that into guns. A lot of my audience is into history, and they don't want to relocate to a platform that is only guns. And even if they are gun guys, they're not one-dimensional people. They would like a platform that allows them to watch whatever they want to watch. And by the way, there's a value to that. But YouTube remembers when you've seen a video or not seen a video. That alone makes them the playlist king for a lot of people. Like, I want to go here because then I'm not shown the same thing over and over and over again.
And that's one of the beauties of YouTube, right? You can't do that without wide swath and diverse amount of content. And so YouTube's amazing thing is that they have, over all the time they've existed, essentially became the de facto content distribution point of like every topic that's ever existed for man to talk about. At one point, I referred to it as the digital library of Alexandria. And I have to say, I got quoted in Reason magazine for that, which I was kind of cool. I thought that was kind of neat. But yeah, I read that. I'm like, Carl Cassarda called it the digital library of Alexandria. I'm like, wow, thanks, Reason. That was really cool. But It really is. And the value they bring is that you might watch a gun video now and a video about how to make ice cream 10 minutes later and another video about the history of something else, and then maybe something that's pure entertainment, like Baby Shark, right? And you get that all out of one plate. And the value of that is, one, it makes you want to stay there, which is in YouTube's interest, and I think that that's interesting that they're playing with that. The other thing that's really valuable to this, for those of us that are liberty and firearms rights minded, is, guess what? The more rational, reasonable channels like InRange and C&Rsenal, we're getting people that normally wouldn't watch gun content, and they go there to watch that. Let's say they go watch a history video like on and they come to watch that, and then there's a firearms thing that comes after it, and they're like, what's this? And they watch a gun thing. And I will tell you that I have got, I'm sure, I'd like to hear from you as well, Matthias, but I bet you this is the case, a lot of comments, either in email or even in the comment section, from people that are like, I never thought that guns could be cool, safe, or sane, and your channel taught me otherwise, and now I watch. That's how we make this cause valuable.
Yeah, I've actually had other gun personalities that won't be named criticize me for not being pro, like, certain political messages. I have, by the way, appeared personally as myself on podcasts and things like that, where I do give my personal opinions on politics. But C&Rsenal, when you come to the C&Rsenal channel, when you come to the C&Rsenal webpage, and you watch Anvil or Primer or something like that, you're not going to get a political lecture, because I have chosen to do one thing and do it well. I talk about old guns. I don't talk about current politics with that medium. We do have a standing thing where if a law were to come out that affects our ability to produce the show, we will mention that. But we're not going to say, go vote this way. We're just going to say, hey, by the way, if this bill passes, this is the effect it will have on the show. That's it. Goodbye. And I think that's, A, that's honoring the intelligence of the person who's watching the show, and B, that's honoring their ability to choose the content they're consuming. If they want political gun content, they can go check out a number of channels that are so easily accessible and do a much better job than we do. And so in some ways, we're sort of a gateway drug for firearms, because people who are not into the whole Second Amendment hoorah can come in and learn about firearms in their historical context, because whether you like guns or not, as a person now in the modern day, guns shaped your history. I don't exactly have an affinity for nuclear submarines. I don't want one. I don't have room to keep one. If I did, I feel like the paperwork would be a pain in the ass, and then I would end up with a leak, and that would be bad for the yard. I still want to know about nuclear submarines. Like they had an effect, and they're interesting. So if somebody had a channel in which they took a 1942 nuclear sub, reconditioned it, and put it back to sea for 8 weeks, I would watch that. I would love to know, like, I didn't realize how hard it was to do this, and I didn't know that you could smell the farts from the back to the front, and whatever it is. I would be interested in watching that. It does not mean that I want, that for my personal life. And that's the part where I like to keep the politics out of C&Rsenal. And it also makes us more accessible to the rest of the world. And I think in that regard, we're trying to comply with what YouTube wants, which is sort of this neutralized content. So I'm not sure why we're getting thrown under the rug.
Well, I'm going to speak for you for a minute. I mean, I know your content is fire. Content's far more the history of the men that designed it, the history of how it was used, the machinations of how it functions or why it didn't function or what happened in certain environments. Those are things that can be fascinating to someone that isn't necessarily fascinated in the gun. And that's something that can bring in a broader base and a broader audience of support that I think is valuable. And personally, I don't want, InRange covers a wide variety of topics, and it's not all guns, actually. There's stuff in it. And I'm not that interested in preaching to the choir. I'm interested in putting out content that I'm interested in personally, and hoping bringing a lot of people along with me to go, hey, this stuff's cool, and there's no reason to hate it. You just need to understand it. And that's the value that channels like ours can bring that isn't saber.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, that's a little bit off of our topic, though, which is whether or not we should switch platforms. So let me bring it back around
No,
and
it's
say,
not. I don't think it is. I'm sorry. I'm going to cut you off for a second. It's
okay,
not, because the reason YouTube does that, YouTube brings people to us that would, if we went to a platform that was only gun content, we've lost that ability to reach a broader audience that may not know that they care about the topic, and that is relevant.
that's true. Our content should not be enriching only for gun people. So we don't want to go to limited places. We don't want to go to places that are highly politicized, because there's a lot of new. The funny thing is about when you just, there's an old quote: when you defend free speech, you spend all your time defending scoundrels, because they're the ones that everybody's out to censor. Whenever there's a censorship push on YouTube or somewhere else, it's usually the people who are quote unquote the worst behaved who go and found the new free speech platform. And at some point, you're the second wave, and when you're the second wave of bans, the only place you can go play is with the KKK, and you immediately get colored with that. And the truth is, you're just trying to have a message. Now, it has nothing to do with the other person's message, but for whatever reason, it didn't fit whatever the core platform was. And so there's a lot of fear with that. It's like trying to launch a new platform. What is it? The Fermi paradox, which says that there may be an extinction event that we have yet to encounter that all intelligent life hits. I feel like there's a sort of a barrier that all new media hits, which is that when you're first scrabbling for people, you have to allow the worst behavior. Reddit used to be like this. Back when Reddit competed with Dig, you would find racist, horrible things on Reddit all the time. And then once they reached enough mass, they were able to sort of remove that initial. By the way, there's a lot of their founding was being able to say whatever you want. But then once they have enough mass to sustain themselves without that sort of hatred, they're able to rip it back out. But they counted on it at one point in time in order to sustain their growth. So that's the other part of switching platforms, is you start to take on, whether you want to or not, whether your content changes or not, you start to be branded with the same labels as the people who are pioneering these platforms.
At the same time, I find it interesting that when we put stuff on when I put InRange, there was a lot of support, and there was some people that are like, how could you be associated with that content? And whether you're pro pornography or not, or ambivalent, I don't really care. I'm not. It was a video distribution network that people could watch it or not watch it. Now, granted, the stuff around the video may not be something you want to see.
It's a bit distracting.
I don't know. Yeah, that's up to you. But like, one of the things that I thought about when that happened is, I'm like, have you looked at some of the stuff that's on YouTube? You may not see it in the thumbnail in my video specifically, but some of our supporters started going around and looking on YouTube and finding incredible things all over the YouTubes that are still there now, by the way. Specifically, not just showing, but demonstrating actually illegal behavior. And somehow some of that stuff's still on there. So I don't think you are necessarily, I don't think you are personally culpable for the content that surrounds you, but there are people that will think you are. And that's a weird concept, but it's unavoidable.
And then to some degree, you don't want to have to make somebody wade through a bunch of images of pornography in order to consume your content, just because. Like, it'd be much nicer if they could just sort of deal with a handful of thumbnails that they may or may not approve of, but are certainly not, traumatizing to their children or something. But
and that's why it's acceptable if it's one distribution network. But let's say Pornhub was the only place to put your content. Now that's a different problem, but those are different things.
Right, and by the way, this is sort of why YouTube starts down the road they're going down. If we were to allow, Spider-Man Elsa videos to be right next to, big, beautiful women with tight-fitting stockings, the thumbnail clash would be very harsh for the average consumer, like just trying to be on that platform. So at some level, YouTube does make a decision about what they do and don't allow on the platform, and not a lot of people get mad that pornography is not on YouTube. But then what else? It's one of those know it when you see it. Okay, are firearms safe to have in this environment? Well, that's the decision of the people who own the platform. We would prefer that they don't make that decision, though, because we don't really want to have to go play with the other platforms, and we want to be in there with all the other content. And by the way, YouTube has a risk here. If they push off too much content, they will no longer be the big dog, and people will find somewhere else to go for their content, and then they will lose out on that opportunity. Okay, so I think we covered the why we are not currently switching platforms. Maybe we should get on to our next topic.
Yeah, no problem. I think I agree. And like I said, InRange will continue to be on multiple distribution channels. YouTube's where the views are.
If you're looking for the second half, it's over at C&Rsenal's channel. The link is in the description.